Well, welcome again, a dear friend, Berry Marroquin in Guatemala. How are you doing?
Jason, what a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. And I would like to say hello to everyone that is going to watch this podcast.
But it's so good to see you, and so good to have you back. You've been a guest before, so as you know, we're moving to a new format. So we're going to be doing a few more of these video type podcasts to see if we kind of enter the modern age. Although I still like the other format, the radio format, but I enjoy this one as well, and it's always good to see who I'm talking to. And for those of you who do not know Betty, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I know I'm not going to do the introduction justice because Betty, you've done so much in your career, and you really are one of the liberty warriors in Central America. You've been a vice presidential candidate in your country. I think that was in 2019, but way before that, you spent a lot of time in our country as a diplomat. You served at the U.S. At the Guatemalan embassy in Washington D.C. You also have a unique interest in our Congress, in our constitutional republic, and you studied it closely, and you've been involved with it for a very long time. You've taken those lessons that you've learned here, and you taught us a lot too. But you took it back to Guatemala, and you've made a good use of it with you and your network there. You also served at the UN for a while for your country, and you've been involved in the private sector. You've been a businesswoman, and now you're still in the political saddle. I don't know how you do it, because every time I get a story from you about what's happening in Guatemala, I just wonder, what is Betty up to now? Because you're doing so much down there, and I'm not just saying this because you're watching me now. It's the truth. You and your team, and I just wanted to share that story with a lot of Americans who are trying to understand why President Trump, why Secretary Rubio are spending so much time and focus on the region. I could think of nobody better than you right now to share some of that with our viewers. So thank you for spending time with us, and tell us a little more about how you got here. I mean, I gave people a quick overview, but there's a lot more there. And why do you love America so much? I think that's a great way to start.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. First, let me tell you that I don't have a team. I have colleagues like me who are business people or professionals that are as fed up as I am with what is happening, and that, like me, share a very MAGA mentality. When I ran for VP, my agenda, except for immigration, because we didn't have that issue here, honestly, it was like President Trump's. I am a hardcore Trumpist. So, and always have been. I remember when the first election happened, I got up at 2 a.m. in the morning to write an article. I was so excited. I needed to celebrate that President Trump had become president.
Yeah, I
Or
remember.
just
I
45,
remember.
you know?
And when you say that, I think for folks that hear that and they wonder what is she talking about? She lives in Guatemala, but Guatemala has a strong, and a lot of countries in the region, not just Guatemala. There's this big myth out there that there are no conservatives, there's no nationalists, and you are a nationalist. You are a proud Guatemalan nationalist, and you folks were defending your country from. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, from this globalist elite, Washington-based elite. Some of them that were attacking what the work that conservatives and nationalists were doing in places like Guatemala. But you were MAGA, frankly, before there was a MAGA movement here. So that's definitely a fact. What is it about the movement that so inspired all of you to say, yes, we back President Trump. We like what he's doing, not just now, but when he first ran.
Well, first, let me tell you that as the world is moving with these threats from the New World Order and the World Economic Forum and the UN and all of that, it was like a breath of fresh air to hear someone speak about individual freedom, to speak about the need to preserve, respect, and defend the sanctity of private property, of the right to choose for the individual, and also to hear him talk about sovereignty. Many people don't understand the concept of sovereignty, but we are very much in favor of what sovereignty means, which is the right of a country to determine its own destiny. However, in our case, when President Trump won the first time, I was extremely excited. Well, when he won last November, I mean, I could tell you how happy I was because we lived here in Guatemala everything that the American people went through during the Biden Harris administration. We went through that for longer time. Guatemala was the guinea pig for all the manipulation of justice, for all the horrors that you've seen in your country. We were the guinea pigs. They did it to us first. USAID, since the Obama administration, was hell for us. And during the Biden administration, it reached the highest degrees of intrusion, of manipulation, of they paid journalists. I can't wait for the dissection by Dodge of what USAID did in Guatemala. I can't wait for that
You
because
know,
I am certain a lot of people that defended democracy and forgot about the Republican principles that make a democracy good. They were on those payrolls. I could bet money on that.
oh yeah, and in fact, I mean, what Betty's talking about, and we've been years on this project, personally and professionally, the weaponization of foreign aid, and what happened in Guatemala was truly outrageous. We can do, in fact, we have done shows in the past on this little experiment called CSIG, a so-called
Nightmare.
yeah, so-called anti-corruption body that, again, that's not for today, but it's the way we project it into the region, violating Guatemalan sovereignty. That's what we did, and pretty much put
Yeah.
a star chamber of lawyers and corrupt jurists from other countries to sit in judgment about what the Guatemalan government may or may not have been doing. If they had done that to America, I mean, we would have said, get out of here. Well, first of all, they would have never made their way in here. Although maybe with some Democrats, you never know, maybe they would have. But what they did to Guatemala was truly horrible. And you're still dealing with that. In fact, just this week, I was listening to your president, and the message that you're giving us, which includes respect of private property, individual rights, respect of fundamental rights, respect of free enterprise, low taxes, low regulation, rule of law. It seems when I hear the president, Arevalo, speaking, I'm hearing a completely different philosophy. And in fact, he and a group of his fellow travelers who were down there for the CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, their little confab down there. Correct me if I'm wrong and explain to Americans what this means when your president expressed his support for Mexican, in my opinion, communist president Claudia Sheinbaum to create an economic well-being summit as a means to create, this regional unity. In fact, all this is being done in response to what President Trump is doing on tariffs and other policy. What exactly is he up to? And tell people who your president is, because there's some things happening in Guatemala right now that I never thought would happen. And even you've told me you sometimes don't even go out sometimes because it's not safe. But before we get to that, what is your president? What's his background? And why is he completely different from what you and your colleagues are fighting for in your country?
Well, he's the son of former President Arevalo Bermejo, but his father was the one that, for example, introduced illnesses in Guatemala. He allowed indigenous communities to be used as guinea pigs for scientists who wanted to try syphilis vaccines and syphilis things. To give you an example, I mean, not exactly
Well,
fabulous.
so he was doing like a Tuskegee Airmen experiment down there.
Yes, and he was a communist. So he went to Uruguay, and Arevalo, our current Bernardo Arevalo, our current president, he was born in Uruguay, not in Guatemala. He became president with a party that has been demonstrated by our Attorney General that committed fraud since its foundation, and he won the first. He won the right to run on the second round for the election. We have two. Via fraud. Now we know there's over 2 million votes out of 5 million votes unaccounted for. So there was fraud, evidently. There's people in jail that have admitted to have committed the fraud during the first and the second round of the election that put this man in power. Well, so he's a communist. That's what he is. He's a Gucci, what we call Gucci socialist, because, he's the kind of president in a country like mine who cannot eat Guatemalan meat. He has to import the meat that he eats. So every month we subsidize his import around a little over 11,000 cues, which is little less than $3,000. We subsidize for him to eat, while children at the schools eat 2 tortillas and a banana, Jason, for the first time in our history. All the previous presidents, even the so-called socialist UNE, 3 periods behind, gave food, actual vegetables and meat and chicken to the children at the schools, at the public schools. And this guy is giving them 2 tortillas and a banana? Give me a break.
When you ran for vice president, I remember your themes were anti-corruption and putting faith moves mountain and votes move your country. And you talked a lot about schools and how school choice, there's a movement where parents were finally able to, in Guatemala, able to be more involved in the education of their children. These people you told me over the years are just trying to undo all of that. Is any of
They've undone it.
they've done, and we're going to get to that now. And then, how is it in such a short span of time? In fact, the thing with the food, I mean, tell Americans briefly the average income of a Guatemalan and what it means to have your president, your so-called president, bringing food in because he doesn't want to eat what you can grow. But because I find that shocking, and that people just talk about it. But are they setting out to undo a lot of these school choice meal programs, things that you're trying to rechange your country to make it more responsive to voters? Is that their plan? Is that what they want to set out to do?
No, we have a minister of education who's fully woke, who I don't think she even likes children at all. She's been introducing woke mentality into public schools and trying to impose it in the private schools as well, in the pensums of the private schools, even though all of that is against our Constitution. So she's the one that changed it. She just took the money from the budget that was assigned to food, that, as you rightly said, parents were in control of the food that was given to their children at their public schools. The mothers were in charge in many of them. The mother said, we'd rather cook it ourselves. So they receive the food, they prepare the food for their children at the school. They were certain their kids were having a decent meal at school. She took that away. She just took it away. She reduced budget for all that. Today, there's about 100,000 teachers demonstrating on their way to the National Palace to ask for that minister and the entire government to give up their jobs, to resign. Over 100,000 teachers from public schools.
It's over
right now.
And this
going on right now.
And it's one of these issues. It's the school choice meal issue, part of it, what they're protesting.
Yes, that's part. And they're protesting the woke agenda. You see, the American people need to understand that Guatemalans are intrinsically conservative. We believe in the sanctity of our children, the majority of us. Of course, there's some sick people like those that were found in Florida this week, that were pedophiles of the most brutal kind. There's bad apples everywhere, but the majority of the Guatemalan people are law-abiding, are people that want to protect their children. All they want is opportunities to bring food to the table legally. That's all they want. The Guatemalan people, the mentality of the indigenous communities is more capitalist than Wall Street. They believe if I had to work to get my 2 chickens, why on earth will the government come and take one away to give it to that one who doesn't work? Hell no.
Let me
That's
ask
the
you,
mentality of our indigenous communities.
what's the business? Let's go back briefly to your president. What's this business of him bringing food in from outside the country? That sounds really bizarre. What's that about?
Well, he considers himself a king. He walks like one. So the man wants to, it's funny. In the US, people criticize President Trump's hair, which I think is fabulous. I wish I had that set of hair. But the one here, behaves like a king. He's like a monarch. He thinks of himself as a monarch. They just spend over 100,000 cues from our money, taxpayers' money, for his grandson's party, baptism.
With your tax money,
know?
they're paying for family
First
party.
time, first time in the history of my country that a president does that. And what did the vice president did in the meantime while everything was at boiling point here? She was in New York. She was invited by Todd Robinson to an island somewhere with a group of hush-hush, whatever. They call themselves Illuminati, so God only knows. She went to Chile. Then she went to Paris. She spent about a month away. And we were paying her first class tickets for her and all of her entourage and paying everything, us being a poor country, from our taxpayers' money.
So that's what you mean
So
by you're ruled by Gucci socialists is what you're saying. You said that earlier. You said that earlier.
Socialists, you see the same thing as Soros and the Obamas and the Clintons. They want socialism for everybody else. And they want to distribute everybody else's wealth as long as nobody touches theirs. But of course, and just like the Clintons and the Obamas, these people have never ever worked in their entire life. They have never had a business. They have no idea what it is to go to a bank, ask for a loan, pay your loan, pay your employees. They have no idea about that. They've been in the bureaucratic world all of their lives, NGO world, that's all they've done. That's all they know. So going back to a question that you asked me before, why do I love President Trump and the MAGA concept? He's a businessman. He knows the risks. He knows what it takes. He knows what his people, his employees have gone through in the various stages of his business career, when the economy in the US was not good, when the economy was good, when there was crime in New York before Mayor Giuliani, my favorite mayor of all times. He knows all that. So he's a president that is demonstrating from day one that he understands what we the people need, what we the people go through. And he's doing everything he can to put the American people first. That's what we want to do here. Put the Guatemalan people first and do everything we have to do to guarantee crime is gone to the roof. Jason, you go out in Guatemala and every day there's drug traffickers killing each other. There were 2 crimes this week, one 2 blocks away from my apartment, and I live in an area that is a nice area, very safe. Like, let's say for Americans to understand, for Washington to understand, I live in an area that would be the equivalent to Georgetown. Well, 2 blocks away, guy was murdered. His car was, covered in holes. There's a guy that was supposed to, listen to this one, because this one is really terrible. The president of Congress had an advisor who was summoned by the public ministry to testify about the way that this Congress illegally appointed the leadership in January 14th at midnight, violating every single law and rule for that matter. He was going to go testify at the public ministry. He was killed the night before. That's how the state of the nation is here.
I'm glad you
You know,
started.
I don't live in fear. I don't live in fear, Jason, because I'm a God abiding person and I believe the archangels take care of me all the time. But frankly, this is out of control.
I'm glad you opened the door. I was going to ask you about that because the security issue, Americans, policymakers talk a lot about it, but I'd love you to talk a little more about it because you come at it from the vantage point of somebody who's actually there. And this week, as we were talking before the recording started, the DNI, the big report on threat assessments happened. They do this every year. This particular report was published this week. I haven't finished reading all of it, but it did mention Guatemala. It was kind of curious how, frankly, this read a little bit. It's kind of Biden-esque, so I'm not sure how much the Trump administration was able to get in there and focus on that. And it only focused on the migrant component of it, which we all know that the triangle and the region Guatemala is important because of that. But it's much bigger than that. And I think we have an opportunity in the next report and other reports to talk a little bit deeper about that. But what's important for us, our viewers to know, and what Betty will talk about, is that crime that she's talking about, that's transnational crime. It's not just something that's happening in domestic to her country. And it's a failure, frankly, of left-wing rulers and bureaucrats and globalists that don't want to crack down on crime. And for the U.S., Guatemala is very important because it's along a major migration drug trafficking route. It's an area that affects border security. It's an area that's important to our counter-narcotics and security strategy and trade. I mean, we want to trade. We want to trade a lot. And we want to be down there doing businesses under CAFTA-DR and other, agreements that we have with Guatemala. And something you said, Betty, about President Trump, and we'll jump back to this quickly, but on the business side, I think if you've never made a payroll, and you and I have been, and I am still a business owner, and you don't know how to read an accounts receivable, and you don't know how to keep your employees paid, it's very easy to be a government official because you really never really taken the risk and lived through those cycles of being in the marketplace. And I think that's what unsettles so many people because he approaches problems from the business side, even on the security issue we're talking about now, which impacts governance, it impacts your country, your sovereignty, your property rights. How is it that you're living in a place where there's so much American activity, and there could be more investment, expats, and you yourself are telling me I have to be careful when I go out because crime's getting really, really bad? What's happening down there?
Well, what is happening is that we have a minister of governance that thinks that crime, that us citizens that are screaming our brains out, that there's crime has gone to the roof. He says it's our perception. So we have a vice minister of narcotics who Vox Populi here that he is in cahoots with the criminals. We know that drugs are still, you see, Secretary Rubio came to Guatemala and Bernardo Arevalo said amen to everything that Secretary Rubio said. The minute Secretary Rubio left on that plane, Arevalo turned around and did everything he wants. He's not complying with the things that the U.S. government has requested. There's still drugs going through the border in an area called Sayakshe. There's still illegals, but VIP illegals, meaning terrorists from other countries, people like that, not Guatemalans, not Salvadorians, no. Criminals from other continents that come to Guatemala as a means to get to the US, they're still crossing the borders. From what I hear from my friends in law enforcement, they're still crossing the border. So as far as we are concerned, Arevalo lied to his teeth. they're still under investigation by the public ministry if he, in fact, when he went to Costa Rica and met with the Chinese ambassador in San Jose, Costa Rica, because we don't have a People Republic of China ambassador in Guatemala, they're in Costa Rica. He went and met with this ambassador, and apparently he sold land next to our biggest port in the Pacific, right next to it. Why on earth would he sell land to the Chinese Communist Party? So that's under investigation.
I'm asking you that because it shocked us, and it also, another reason we're talking today is because there was a recent annual certification made to Congress by the State Department that Guatemala is combating corruption and impunity. Then this just happened this week. You know, they're talking about working with the U.S. to strengthen rule of law and protect human rights and beat corruption. So if our government is making these certifications to Congress, but you're telling me 100,000 people, teachers and civil society groups are protesting the central government, what's the disconnect here? What's going on?
We've had protests for a month already. That report is almost carbon copy to the one Todd Robinson left from 2 years ago.
Tell everybody who Todd Robinson is, because
Todd Robinson was first DCM in Guatemala, Deputy Chief of Mission. Then he was ambassador in Guatemala. He was also DCM in Venezuela. Then he became head of INL.
Yeah. So Betty, what Betty's saying is that he's a U.S. government official. I just wanted Betty to know that he's a U.S. diplomat.
Yes.
And
I would love it, Jason, if I may, when Dutch investigates USAID's actions and all of that, I would love for a FOIA to be done on his actions in Guatemala, because Guatemala, under his watch, went from only light transshipment, to the bottleneck for every single illicit that goes north. He's the one, under his watch, he forbid the military our military from going into the highlands, where now all the drug lords have their landing fields and, whatever. He's the one that prevent the military from going in there. And under that ambassador's watch, basically drug traffickers became stronger in Guatemala. There is something very fishy going on.
So let's break it down a little bit for our viewers. What Betty's describing and this report that I just referenced, and we'll provide a link to this on the show notes so you can read it. In March, late March, there was a report sent by the State Department, required by law, to Congress, and that's very typical. This reporting requirement is put into a lot of our laws involving foreign policy and others. Doesn't have to be just foreign policy. This particular report is required under several laws. One of them involves that Guatemala is doing certain things that Betty's been talking about now. And it involves rule of law, it involves the court systems, transnational crime, drug trafficking. And the way these reports are put together, it includes various different people in the government. They just don't come out of Maine State in Washington, D.C. The embassy, that's what Betty's talking about, where Todd Robinson, I think his last post was ambassador to Guatemala, has been sending cables to the State Department. And they have their meetings, and there's people there. And then there's people at the State Department in Washington who have, there's a Guatemalan desk officer. So there's this machinery, and it's the way they're supposed to do their jobs. And these reports get dispatched. They review them internally. Then Congress gets this. They look at it. And if our representatives in Congress read these reports, and it says that Guatemala is cooperating with America to counter drug trafficking and human trafficking and other transnational crimes, but it's not true.
It's a half-truth.
There we go. It's a half-truth.
Half-truth.
Then you can see where the problem is at and why we're talking to Betty to get the other side, because she can give us a perspective that we're not going to get from the current government. And so Betty, we know why it's important Why do you think it keeps happening?
Well, it is because the deep state tentacles are still at the embassy here, sadly. But let me tell you why it's a half truth. The public ministry has always, under Consuelo Porras, Doctora Maria Consuelo Porras, who was sanctioned by Todd Robinson and Norma Torres and Brian Nichols and Samantha Powers during the Biden administration, has always complied with all the extraditions. She's complying with all the organizations within the U.S. government: DOJ, FBI, DEA, even INL. But since she's a conservative who's also the first attorney general in the world to persecute pedophilia in Guatemala, she's working ever since that happened. She's been working with Attorney General Ken Paxton from Texas on Save the Children's role in child trafficking. And she's also investigating. And are you sitting properly? Because you're going to fall from the chair. She's also investigating, as a request by Homeland Security from the first Trump administration, money laundering, money from the USAID that was used to purchase stocks at a bank in Guatemala. She's investigating many other cases, but those two in particular. Why is she so hated by the Democrats? Because there's, in those investigations, US government officials will come out implicated. I could bet my money on it.
So for viewers and listeners, I just give you some more context. We've had Attorney General Porras on the show before. She's a remarkable woman. I think she's kind of like an iron lady for Guatemala, who has stood firm and not only had to deal with the left in Guatemala, because they really do not like her, which is a pretty tough road to be on because they're ruthless down there. But she's also had to deal with a globalist movement and American USAID programs that weaponized rule of law programs, not just in Guatemala. This happened all over the Western Hemisphere, where they took your money, our taxpayer money, and weaponized it against people in these countries and made their life miserable, accused them of corruption without any basis of law. In fact, she was sanctioned for a time. We're trying to track down if those sanctions have been removed or not. But she stood firm, and she stood firm throughout the whole process. And it was eye-opening to me to think that USAID money, so all the money that DOGE has been uncovering, and not just USAID, let's talk about, Betty, USAID, okay, the Wilson Center, USIP, National Endowment for Democracy, National Democrat Institute, the International Republican Institute, all these constellations of foreign aid and democracy programs sent into Latin America, and in some cases weaponized against people like Attorney General Porras, which what she's saying, what Betty's saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Betty, is that she was targeted because she's a conservative, she's a Christian. She's defending
She's a Catholic, hardcore Catholic.
A hardcore Catholic that's defending the Constitution of her country, which this is something nobody ever talks about, but it's one of the few constitutions left in the region that defend the right to life.
Mm-hmm.
They yes. Protect, they treat the woman and the baby
from conception.
Correct. So they go after her not because she's good at combating corruption. No, that could be part of it. But they also go after her because she's a Christian, because she's an unabashed Catholic, because she defends life from conception until natural death, because she defends marriage between a man and a woman. That bothers her people here in Washington, D.C. So they took our money, our AID program money, and used it against her. Just like in the case of the so-called anti-corruption CICIG commission that we spoke about at the beginning of the show, they took money that somehow made its way through the UN system and the OAS and weaponized it to undermine Guatemalan sovereignty and people like Dr. Porras. Let me ask you something.
And not only her.
Oh, and also, it's not just her. It's a lot of other people on the right and conservatives down there. But let me ask you something. Why do some Republicans go along with this stuff? Because I remember when I first started speaking out against CSIG, many, in fact, when CSIG started, I was a critic from the very beginning. And I kept, and you know this, I kept saying, this is an experiment that will fail because it's undermining rule of law in Guatemala, sovereign rule of, and sovereignty, violating fundamental individual rights, and it has no business in that country telling it what to do. But why did some Republicans defend it then? Because I was criticized for that. I was said, "Oh, Jason, that's you shouldn't be like that. They're all corrupt down. They're all corrupt down there." But what do you tell people in Washington, Republicans, conservatives watching this about these programs and what they've done to your country?
Well, first of all, I believe there's two types of Republicans. There's the rhinos and there's the real Republicans. But what happened, in my view, is that Congress, the real Republicans in Congress, like Mike Lee and Langford and Wicker and Chairman Chris Smith and so many, the majority, I would say, are goodwill people, but they rely on the information they receive from the embassy. And they rely on the information they receive from all those institutions that you've mentioned and others that you didn't, that were in that article, that tell them whatever, that's the info they receive. So they react in accordance to what they're being fed as information. That's, in a nutshell, what is happening. And conservative voices in the meantime in Guatemala were being subjected to all sorts of persecutions. I have a list of judges that were sanctioned. The embassy would call and say, if you continue with this investigation, we're going to take your visa and that of your family. I know people whose grandbabies the visa was taken from the grandchild for a year old for being an enemy of democracy.
No, but stop. So our government,
your embassy,
our embassy threatened Guatemalan officials on the right?
Yes. And until they see the deep state neutralized, they will not speak up. But since I'm not afraid of anything, I say it. So what? I only fear God. Period.
Amen. Well, that's why we love speaking with you. So, I mean, things are getting a little better, but we know that there's still in the space of how we engage in the region, and in particular Guatemala. What are you seeing that's improving, and where are we needing to improve, especially if Congress were to do oversight hearings, or even the Trump administration? Like you've told me many times, we need an ambassador down here that's a political ambassador.
A MAGA ambassador.
A MAGA ambassador.
MAGA DTM.
You said that many times. So in addition to having a political appointee, a political ambassador, MAGA-focused ambassador, what else should American policymakers be looking at when making decisions about Guatemala?
American politicians, especially the State Department, Secretary Rubio, should ask for a FOIA to be done on former government diplomats in Guatemala. And also, he should revise all the sanctions against judges, the Attorney General and her team, and politicians that opposed the Democrat woke agenda in Guatemala. Because pretty much every member of Congress that opposed that agenda had their visas, and I know one whose ex-wife had the visa taken. And the two children, the son, the 7-year-old child, had his visa taken because they were enemies of democracy. I mean, please, the U.S. is not a country of thugs. The U.S. is a country of people, law-abiding people. And the U.S. needs to go back to where President Trump is taking it. Just we celebrate it. He's taking it back to being a nation, one nation under God, where we the people had the rights respected, and knowing that the Constitution protects the individual from abuses from the government. That's what we want in Guatemala. We want the same thing. So basically, we're willing to clean our own mess. All we need is an embassy that stops behaving like a deep state embassy and starts behaving like a Trump embassy.
Like a partner, an ally, like work with you like an ally. So let me ask you about, as we start to get toward the end of our time together.
One more thing, Jason, one more thing that we would love to see. We would love for Palmerola in Honduras, that is now under that communist woman. We would love for that to come to Guatemala, but not under this administration. That is a mess. We're going to clean our mess. But then we need military presence. We would love to see military presence, joint military presence from Guatemalans and Americans at the ports. You know, our ports.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about that. That was my next question. I was going to ask you about, I believe there should be. Don't you think it's time that we did have a stronger U.S. military presence in Guatemala?
Absolutely. Our military has been reduced to nothing. We need the
why?
Because the left. Because the left, that's part of their tactic. You know, Sao Paulo Forum and now Grupo de Puebla, which Arevalo abides by to the dot. One of the things they do is to control the military and reduce it to its minimum. So we want U.S. military presence here.
So let me ask you another question about that, because I agree with you 100%. I think we should have military presence throughout the Western Hemisphere to work with our partners, to keep our ports safe, to keep our all the borders safe. We can do that. And I know there's a lot of people over here who would love to do that. What about something else I think that has to happen? Don't you think that DHS, FBI, DEA, maybe a few others should be working hand in hand with Attorney General Porras in these investigations?
I believe they are. And that's why I said half truth, because I believe they are. I know that she has contact with them, because I see her press releases and everything that, you know, ex-drug trafficker was requested to be captured and extradited. She does everything she has to do to comply with that.
No, I know it happens. I'm saying shouldn't a lot more be happening, because it's coming out at a trickle. And my conversations with Attorney General Porras pretty much showed that she's sitting on a lot that she's willing to share with the United States. And during the Biden years, she was pretty much ignored, and a lot of our law enforcement suffered because of it. And that USAID DHS investigation, I think it's ready to go based on not what she has said to me, but other people unofficially have said to me. I think that needs to come to light. I think we need to work with all our partners in the hemisphere to figure out every single country in the hemisphere should be working with U.S. law enforcement, the U.S. Justice Department, to figure out how U.S. government money was misspent in all of these countries and find out who was behind it. Because that business about using AID money to buy stocks,
that's money laundering in our law.
If that's what happened, that's what the law shows. That's where we go. So another question for you. I'm going to keep you in the hot seat for a little longer. What do you think needs to happen on our end to boost trade? Because I think we could be doing so much more with Guatemala, and we're not. What's happening that we can't seem to grow the market down there to get more American companies down there?
Well, Jason, who would want to come to a country where crime is to the roof? Who? You know? Then private property. The same thing that is happening in South Africa is happening here. We have Daniel Pascual.
Okay, stop. Okay, stop. Did you just... Oh, all right.
It's another bomb.
All right, so you just threw another grenade into this conversation. The same thing. So, folks, what's happening in South Africa, if you don't know,
happening here.
Take a quick look at it.
Institutionalized.
They're stealing property from white landowners and giving it away to other people. In some cases, they are killing white landowners in retribution for some stuff that's totally nonsensical. They're a communist government in South Africa. They've been persecuting landowners for a long time. Nobody wants to talk about that. You're saying there's something similar happening in Guatemala?
Yes, Fontierras is part of the executive apparatus. Fontierra's head is Daniel Pascual, who was created, trained, and funded by USAID since around 2011. Okay.
What does that
He's a
agency do?
terrorist.
So go slow. So what does that
He
agency
had
do?
Codeca. He basically, the USAID took this guy, trained him, educated him, blah, 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 funded him to have Cook, Konica, and Codeca, the entities that dedicate themselves to obstructing mining, to invading private properties, especially farms. But listen to this, mostly in the regions where there's minerals, natural gas, and oil.
So help us out here for those of us who don't know how the Guatemalan government is structured. Tell our viewers, what is Codeca? What does this fellow Daniel Pascual do? And what is he supposed to do, but what is he actually doing?
Well, Codeca is a terrorist organization that dedicates itself to taking over private property from other people.
Yeah, but it's a government. But it's a government. It's a government agency, is what you're saying.
No. Codeca is an NGO. Those are NGOs. Cook, Konica, and Codeca are NGOs. He was basically the master and commander of those for a while, along with other people. But now this president took this guy and put him at Fontierra, so he's in charge of the land funding.
Okay, so
Fondo de Tierras.
Right. No, so I heard you right. So he's now part of the government.
Now he's part of the government, and now it's institutional. Also, Bernardo Arevalo, during his campaign, I had the video in my X from that time, from 2023. He went as far as going to the area where in Izabal and it's called Franja Transversal del Norte. It's a huge road surrounded by farms where African palm and other crops, bananas and other crops are cultivated. It used to be a heavy area providing jobs. There's also mining nearby. Well, he went there. Bernardo Arevalo, the president right now imposed by USAID in Guatemala, he said, oh, you see these lands here? We're going to take them away and give them to the poor. He said it with his own mouth.
Without compensation. So he's doing like Fidel Castro did in the 1960s, stealing.
And now you have Daniel Pascual doing that to cover it up. Now they say, oh, we're going to pay for these lands. Pay what? They haven't paid anyone. I know of farm owners that came here in the 1800s. Their families came from Germany and other countries in the 1800s. They have kept their farms to this day. They are the ones that have developed the coffee that Americans enjoy from Guatemala. Now they have the bananas that Chiquita and Del Monte export. They have palm oil. Guatemala is among the top 5 producers of palm oil in the world. Well, they're taking those farms. They're invading them.
How many of these actors coming in are Chinese?
Chinese, I haven't seen.
So
in that particular aspect, I haven't seen Chinese there. But
are Chinese a big issue for you all down there or not?
Yeah, we have a lot. But drug traffickers working with Daniel Pascual, that's something that everyone knows in Guatemala. It's no secret.
Okay.
So we need the U.S. government to turn around and look at a very close neighbor that although it's a very small country, it represents a big stone in President Trump's shoe, in the US shoe,
And they
basically,
and they are
because
basically
there's fentanyl being produced here,
yeah,
okay, since last year. Child trafficking to the roof. The amount, for some exotic reason, pedophiles love Guatemalan children. I don't know,
wow.
can't even begin to put heads and tails to the mind of pedophile. But anyways, um, so Guatemala represents a bottleneck for a lot of things
Yeah.
to come into Mexico and then the U.S. So yes, we need attention. We need the Trump administration to look at us closely, to come and talk to those conservative voices here. For decades, the Democrats talked to the communists in our country, and the embassies as well. Who were the ones at the embassy all the time? All the communist lists from here. So of course, members of Congress would receive that information from the embassy, and the information they receive is
Right.
not true, biased, and fixed.
So let me ask you, as we wrap up here, we have a few more minutes to talk some more. I'm still very excited about the potential between future collaboration between our two countries, despite having to deal with a left-wing president and a left-wing regional network, because I do think Americans are still welcome. The Guatemalan people welcome Americans.
We are
Do,
very pro-American.
do you think, like in the example of child trafficking, that a task force would be welcome and the president would have no choice? President of Guatemala would have no choice but to say yes. If the attorney general were to say, I want a task force built, I want Americans here with me working arm to arm, day in, day out, till we eliminate child trafficking in this country. You think that can happen politically right now?
Our equivalent to Pam Bondi, because she's like Pam Bondi,
Yeah, she
she
is.
would love that.
But can it happen with this socialist president you have now?
I don't think it can, because look at what's happening at the ports. The Corps of Engineers from the US came as instructed, as promised by Secretary Rubio. Nothing they have asked for is being done. Nothing. Not a single thing. They're being lied to their teeth. Then you asked me about investment. You know what this president did? In my country, there's informal economy. You cannot take the humble people from the markets and ask them to pay value-added tax and report, a bag of 5 cues of tomatoes. They can't do that. They can't. They don't understand it. The economy is not good right now. They're losing money because the roads are in the worst condition in our entire history. So people are having trouble to move their products from one area to another to come to the city. Our economy is in threats. You know that the private sector had been warning the government, please negotiate the tariffs with the Trump administration. Guatemala has zero tariff for American agricultural and perishable products coming into Guatemala. We import Tyson chicken and a bunch of other things from the US. Zero tariff.
Wow.
Do you think the government took that seriously and negotiated with their counterparts in Washington? Heck no. They said, "Oh, we don't understand what the problem is. It's only 10%," because they have no clue. We are governed by clueless, corrupt thugs.
What about your Congress?
Basically.
What about your Congress?
Our Congress we have some good people in there that are still conservatives trying to fix the mess. But we also have the Congress with the largest amount of members linked to not exactly licit activities.
So we're in a bit of a bind in the parliamentary process. We can't necessarily leverage it as good as we probably could.
Exactly. And one more thing, that report that came out, another objective from that report is to install fear on the DOJ, on our judiciary, because they have 4 articles of impeachment pending against Arevalo, very well fundamented, and 2 against the VP for criminal actions. There's people already confessed and in jail over what's in those articles of impeachment against the president and VP. But our DOJ will not dare move it forward, first because our Congress, as it is right now, will never do anything about it because it's all thugs in the leadership. And second, because that report that came out is basically hush hush way saying we're going to take your visas away if you proceed against Arevalo.
That's brutal. Betty Marroquin, we've been having a great conversation with you. Before we let you go, next time you come back, we'll talk all about your Congress because I do find it a very fascinating place.
It
It's
is. It
it's
does
a,
go.
it's interesting. We're running out. We've run out of time, but I want you to, as always, we want to leave viewers on a high note. I love your country. I've been there many times. I think it's a beautiful place. I still would want to visit. Do you think Americans
You're
should
more than
visit?
welcome.
You think Americans should go? And what is your closing thoughts to your friends back in Washington about why we need American leadership, why we have to remain proactive, and why we have to make sure that we hold that government there to account?
Guatemala is a country where the majority of its people, are good, decent, hardworking people. All we want is for a country where our constitution is respected, where our institutions function the way that they are supposed to function, where justice is not politicized. We want a country that offers opportunities for our own Guatemalan people to thrive here. We want the American dream to become the Guatemalan dream. We want a MAGA Guatemala to make Guatemala seriously great again. Great. We want to make it great because we have all the potential and all the richness to do it. All we need from our friends in Washington is to clean your embassy, to send military, and to pay closer attention to the voices that are denouncing what is happening here. That's the only way.
Amen.
President Reagan did that. President Reagan did that.
And of course,
and it worked, you know?
clean up the legal system and make sure that we help Attorney General Porras so that when American companies go down and invest there and help create jobs and goods that flow
Yeah.
back and forth, that their property rights will be protected and that they'll have recourse if
They
needed.
they don't have to deal with a port that says zero tariff for your product coming in, and then the guy in charge says, "No, I'm going to charge you 20% because he feels
Right.
like it."
Betty Marroquin, it's always a pleasure to have you, Liberty Warrior, Patriot. I hope to see you very soon. Either I will be there in a few months or you will be here. So either way, thanks again for spending time with us today. You're always welcome here.
Thank you so much, Jason. Many blessings to you and to my friend Dilem. God bless.
God bless you.
And God bless President Trump, for whom I pray every day. You know, I was interviewed pretty quickly. I was interviewed by Fox News when I was on the line because I went to the inauguration. I was on the line to go into the Capital One Arena, and I was interviewed by Fox News, and I was so excited and so happy. All I could say was that I kept praying my rosary for President Trump to win.
Well, let's keep praying those rosaries. We're going to need them. We're going to need a few more rosaries. It's challenging times, but I do believe we are entering into a new age. It's going to be a good one, and we just have to keep going. It's only a few months into this. Got a lot more to go. So thanks again, Betty.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.